Hello, this is Fan Electric Ghost. We have Fuzzed-Up music on the line.
How are you?
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm excited to be here.
So let's do a little brief intro. The introduction. I'm Fan Electric Ghost. I'm a music producer and podcaster. Been doing this show on Anchor FM since 2018. We just reached 24,000 listeners worldwide, and we're part of Spotify. Just to give you that information. And we're glad to have you on the show to talk about your fuzzed up music.
That's absolutely incredible, honestly. Like, what a great achievement. Congratulations. And like I'm I'm like super honored to get to be a part of this.
Well, we've been doing podcasting because as a musician, you need new ways to reach people, and we've been doing this since 2016 on other platforms, and we got on this platform. But the cool thing is, during this time, we kind of doubled down. We've been doing maybe 4 podcasts a week,
Oh, dang.
interviewing bands all over the world, and it's just a good way to get musicians in this COVID crisis to have their fans give something to their fans
Oh yeah,
because they
absolutely.
haven't been able to or and get them to be able to communicate to their fan base in a way that maybe they typically didn't do. So we sent you the questions. We're going to start with that. So when did you first get into music? What age? We always ask all the artists we talk to that first question.
So, from like a listening standpoint, I got into music. I've like always loved music since I was little. When I was like really young, I remember listening to like Goo Goo Dolls and Tom Petty and Journey and stuff in the car with my mom. And at a very young age, I absolutely just fell in love with music. I just always wanted to dance and sing, and just there was always such a big draw to it, and I always just loved it. And then around probably early middle school, sixth or seventh grade, uh, did different things with like getting into metal bands and stuff. I mean, started off as hard rock, and we started to make our way towards metal. Different projects like that fell apart, and I quickly realized that a lot of people just didn't have the time or the energy or draw to actually really try and do this and make this happen as a dream. And so that's what kind of drew me towards music production. It was funny because I didn't used to be a big electronic music fan and such, and it was actually my older brother who actually started to introduce me to certain things. And I was like, oh well, they're just pressing buttons. That's easy to make. And that's kind of what drew me to get into production. And then, you open up a DAW for the first time and you're like, what is
Yeah, it's
this?
pretty.
It's like an ancient language. And then when I was around the age of 13, I actually had on my iPod Nano at a friend's going away party. I basically DJ'd for the first time. I was just playing different dance music that I'd been introduced to. Again, mostly through my older brother more than anything. And I just DJ'd and got a bunch of middle schoolers dancing to, EDM. I mean, this is like 2010 or something like that. So I mean, this is
Yeah,
this is
that's
old by today's standard. Very very simple in comparison to today's complexity. And we had a blast, and it was like I sat there and realized that like maybe this is something to look into. And yeah, so that that was pretty much the start of it for me.
so you've been working on music, at the next question since that time. When you started to, you already mentioned that you started getting introduced from being into like the garage bands
Mhm.
or the basement bands or like your young bands are probably more rock oriented.
Mhm.
And you got into like music production in terms
Ye-
of like DAWs and stuff like that, electronic music. So when would you say that you officially became like your own project, or maybe you had multiple projects before this one?
So it's hard for me to really put a date on it because I had multiple projects, and I was just messing with music production and DJing as a hobby more than anything. I want to say, like, my name changed a billion times before I finally settled on one. And then it was probably a little over a year ago that a friend of mine actually reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, I know you DJ. I've got some rappers that are hosting an event at it's Pegasus Lounge here in Tampa." And for me, that was a big deal. That was a real venue, and it still is a real venue. I mean, it's still a great honor to get to play there when I play there. And so I did that, and that was really the first step into real like club gigging and DJing and stuff. And that is really what kind of jump started it all, because after that I started playing at places like Tampa Karaoke, which is also here in Tampa, and then Mad Chiller World. Again, most of them are in Tampa, but outside of that, I mean, it jump started this whole career of playing in different places, and it's just been an absolutely incredible journey.
So when did you realize that you could like write your own music in terms of like this music production in this new format within the DAW? Like they because some people will go and just they'll create beats or they'll create loops, or you're creating like full song.
So
Did
for
you
me,
kind of think that
yeah,
you have that ability?
honestly, that one was kind of tricky for me, because even to this day, I'll still struggle to actually finish a track. I find, honestly, it's hard for me to say this because I love EDM, but I find producing EDM to be pretty boring for the most part. It's so overly
That would somewhat
complex.
agree.
Yeah, yeah, it's so overly complex, and there's so many things you got to do, so many tiny details that make such a huge difference that, and don't get me wrong, I feel like it's kind of solving a puzzle, and I think it's a challenge and it's fun in some ways, but I feel like it loses sight so much of what it means to just create music.
Oh
And
yeah,
so for
compose.
me, when it came to actually learning or actually figuring out that I could sit down and create music, it was when I sat down and just stopped trying to make a specific type of music and just let it happen naturally.
Creative.
And it was something I read online. I think it was through like Digital DJ Tips or something. They had interviewed somebody. I'm trying to remember who it was, but off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure. And it was saying that like the moment you sit down to make music and you decide, I'm going to make this genre of music, you have limited your
Mm-hmm.
creativity in so many ways,
Oh
because
yeah,
you sit there and you might come across a sound that could change the
and
world.
you'll take it
And you went,
and you'll
yeah, you
drop it.
dropped it because you're like, it doesn't fit into the tech house song that I'm making. And the reality is it
Well,
could
you
have,
gotta have that.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
you gotta have that drop structure, and so like you could have something that maybe doesn't have like a trip wave, or it's not trance, or it's not some form of electronica, and then you're kind of stuck to that
mm,
formula. And if you like it's not in the right
yeah,
beat, if it's not doing the right BPM, if it doesn't have the drop in the right place,
exactly.
if it doesn't, then you're kind of like, and then it doesn't have this certain drum sound. Can just to give a like, I'm a kind of progressive
Mhm.
electronic. I came bands like the idea of what I do comes from bands like Yes
Yeah,
and Genesis and Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
yeah,
And electronic music to me is I have modes.
yeah. I know what you're
I
talking
have
about.
prophets. I have Rolands, right?
Mhm.
And I deal with modular synthesis, additive synthesis, subtractive synthesis on hardware synths,
Yeah.
which is the original
Oh
electronic
yeah.
music.
Oh yeah. That's
And,
the impressive stuff right there. When you get into the actual
and
like
that
analog of it all.
Yeah, I'm an analog guy. So I've got all this controlled voltage, all these modes. And there's something about like when you go to compose on a Moog, you can't be limited by like a DAW.
Mhm.
I'm a DAWless recorder.
Mhm.
I use hardware recorders
Nice.
because if you're using a like I use Zoom like L20s and
Mhm.
L24s. And the
Yeah.
reason I do that is because if you're using like an analog Moog, it takes 20 minutes for it to warm up. And
That's true.
you're creating like waveforms from scratch, you kind of go wherever they kind of lead you. They're like members of the band. They kind
Yeah.
of lead you where you're gonna go. And if you had some conceived, like one day I might do some bebop, one day I might do some fusion, one day I might do something like like from like Stevie Wonder's Inner Visions or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
it's sitting
I
down and just letting
yeah,
it lead you and letting music really create itself at the end of the day.
yeah. I mean, if you're on a piano and you start playing with chords, that doesn't necessarily, it's not the same thing as on a grid on a laptop, because once you start playing with those chord arrangements of your keyboard, it's like you can go anywhere. And
Yeah.
if you're limited to the grid, now you can use that. Now use, DAWs do some things that I can't do physically on the piano. I like
Yeah.
to do things where you can't do that. And I think
Exactly.
that's what's cool about those machines. And then you can do something technically as a player you couldn't do. And so then that's kind of cool. But then some people, to limit themselves, instead of doing something advanced, they kind of get stuck in their genre,
Yeah.
and they kind of like disco. They disco it to death.
Exactly. Exactly. I completely agree with that. And yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody fails to realize a lot of times that when you're a musician or a DJ, I mean, you hear DJs say a lot, "Oh, I'm not a jukebox." Well, it's the same thing for being a producer. Like, I'm not a genre. I'm a producer. I can sit down and I can make whatever I want. And I go out and I DJ, and most of it's different types of EDM. Mostly, either I do two types of sets. I do house sets, and then I do like trap and dubstep sets, depending on the crowd, the night, what's going on. I love doing
Yeah.
both of them. And when I sit down to make music, yeah, I've got a couple EDM songs, but the most recent stuff that I released was not EDM whatsoever. It was
No, it's
all
like
like
what you're
chill
doing is
hop
kind of
and
like,
like lo-fi.
yeah, it's like shoegaze.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of like car seat headrest.
Yeah.
We got this kind of car seat headrest. You kind of like, I hear. Now I'm kind of an old school guy, so I hear a little like pieces that like Joy
Oh
Division,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
bands
yeah.
like that. Yeah, stuff like that. Cause I'm I like that Ponda says I make a coffee shop music. It's
Yeah, no, I
it's
get you
very
completely. And honestly, it's such a cool
yeah.
thing to get to be compared to like Joy Division like that. What a great honor to get that said about my music. Like that means
Well,
a
the
lot.
idea of coming into your songs like with that kind of
Yeah.
aesthetic was kind of what the aesthetic they had was this kind of post punk
Yeah.
that created like the new wave.
Mhm.
I mean, they became New Order, and then
Yeah.
from that, but the idea that you could be kind of wide open,
Yeah.
you could take what a band like Kraftwerk did,
Hmm.
and then give it more structure,
Yeah. Well, and
and
I think where a lot of
you know,
that stems from for me is the fact that, I mean, like I said, yeah, I love my EDM. I listen to a lot of EDM, but on my regular day-to-day listening, most of what I listen to is different types of alternative and metal and punk. And I know a lot of people like to
yeah.
use the term pop punk. I'm not a big fan of the term, but to
More
describe a
I'm more into
genre
power
of what
punk.
they're trying to say. So,
More
but
like power punk, like Husker Du. That's my kind of power
I got
punk.
you. Yeah, yeah. So like a lot of my regular day-to-day listening is not electronically based music whatsoever. So I think we're going to see with a lot more of my music in the future, we'll see a lot more of that influence. I've got more like dubstep in the works, as well as a couple rap beats. I got a friend that I'm working with a lot of this. We just got to sit down and get like vocals recorded and stuff. So you'll see a lot more of EDM and rap from me as well. But some of the stuff that I've got working on that I'm excited about is just it's
So
not.
if you mix different genres, would you have the different genres in the same album, or like different projects for different things? Like if you're doing dubstep, we have more dubstep step flavored project, or would you sprinkle it like Prince? He would have multiple genres on the same record.
That part I haven't really decided yet. I feel like if I'm going to release, a lot of times that I'll try to keep it together or release it, as a single or something. It's hard to say. We're going to see how, like, what comes together first. And, because like I said, for the most part, when I sit down and make music, it kind of creates itself. And I don't like getting lost in the tiny little
Yeah,
details of it all. So that being said, with Outside Memories, the EP that I released, a lot of what I was
yeah.
making was all just kind of in the same style. And so it was very easy for me to just go, okay, you know what? I'm not going to release these as singles. I'm just going to release it all together. And so for that
Yeah.
reason, it's just everything I was working on at the time kind of fit together pretty well. And so for the future ones, I'm not sure yet. I guess we'll kind of see.
Well, I love EP and album formats, and in this age of playlist, it's kind of hard to get audience to be into
Hmm.
that. But you know, I come from like an era of the rock opera.
Yeah.
You know, Tommy Quadrophenia, Pink Floyd. You know, and as a progressive synthesist, I would, you know, I'm 50 years old, so when I went to get a record, I would listen to Tommy on vinyl all the way
Yeah.
through. And I think some of the things today, the kids are kind of missing that experience of that when you went to get a
Hmm.
record, you would go and take that vinyl, you go in the basement and you listen to the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
You know,
I
we listened to
completely
Led
agree.
Zeppelin 4 the whole way through. You know, we didn't go and create a playlist and have like, you know, Led Zeppelin and the Who
Hmm.
all playing different tracks. We would listen to the Who's Next all the way
Yeah.
through. And I think that's something some of the kids miss today. I understand that maybe it's cool that you can listen to so many different
Hmm.
genres and so many different things, but you missed out on an artist's. You know, I look at musicians like authors
Hmm.
and their work like
Yeah.
they're great novels, right?
Yeah.
And so if you don't listen to like Outside Memories as a complete project, and you just pick one song like Close, or you pick Indoor
Hmm.
Skyline, you get a picture of it, but you don't get the picture of your
Yeah.
full statement.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some kids are missing that. I see more people are getting into albums
Hmm.
lately, but it's still kind of hit or miss. It's kind of, you know, a lot of people still doing the playlist thing. But how do you kind of handle that with your audience? Do you find that your audience actually, you know, tell you like they like the whole project? They come back and say they like the whole thing, or do they just say they like a particular song?
So for me, like it really depends on the person. I've definitely had a few people come up and say that they liked the whole thing and they listened to the whole thing. And then you get those people that are like, "Oh, I like this particular song." But I think a lot of times the ones that liked a particular song, I find are people that, you know, came across me online through like Instagram or something. Instagram is that big platform for me. That's the one that I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
like to be
yeah,
active on. And I think a lot of times it's, you know, they went onto my page. I had shared, you know, certain songs, and they come
the
across that one
the
song,
snippets, yeah,
and so they go onto Spotify and they just listen to that one song because that's the one they were looking for. And
yeah, yeah,
it's really hard anymore because I think a lot of people get so stuck into a lot of the mainstream stuff that they don't really give entire albums or entire songs, you know, even a chance
yeah,
because like they're so used to like pop, for example. Pop is so it's formatted in the way of okay, it needs to be like 3 minutes and 30 seconds or less because of attention span, and it needs to be
yeah. It's like
released
junk food and candy.
exactly, and it needs to be released as a single because if you release it on an album, they're not going to listen to anything else except for that hit track. And don't get me wrong, a lot of these artists, you know, pop stars and such, come back around, they release that single again with an album. You do get some
Yeah,
diehard fans that listen to the whole thing. I know people
yeah,
that were hardcore, you know, One Direction fans or, you know, Justin Bieber fans, for example, that wound up listening to the entire album and loving their entire albums. But the everyday average listener just wants that one song for, you know, three and a half
yeah.
minutes and then move on. And I personally have been diving more into vinyl. My neighbor across the street actually up and abandoned their home, and when the bank reclaimed it, they let us come in and just like have at it, take what you want. And came
We
across
grabbed all their vinyl.
I came across just this huge thing of vinyls, and a lot of it's like, you know, old school Christmas music, but there was a Led Zeppelin album in there. There was, you know, some Michael Jackson and Jackson 5, and now I have a whole bunch of vinyl records just sitting around. And then I flew out to Colorado recently to get my aunt's old car, and she gave me a vinyl record player as well. It's another older one. It's just like it's all coming together. And I was already
No,
trying
that's
to
cool.
get into vinyl anyway.
Get into it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so like I would
yeah.
love to learn traditional vinyl DJing. It just costs an arm and a leg to
Oh
do
yeah.
it anymore.
I've talked. Yeah,
So,
yeah. I've talked about. Yeah, there's some clubs in New York City that are now saying that they only want guys using
yeah,
vinyl.
yeah, and that's
Um,
understandable
be- be-
completely.
be- because it actually, you know, it gets to a point sometimes where you know it is a certain skill
Hmm.
set on the
Hmm.
vinyl in hip hop that if you're just on the CDJ, you can't do what the old school guys used to do.
Well, and that's the thing
Um,
is that some of the guys on the old school setups and what the old school DJs used to do, on vinyl without all these extra bells and whistles or buttons and knobs on
Yeah.
just very simple
Yeah.
things. And they're still outperforming some of the top
Yeah.
DJs out there right now. And I'm just like, why
Well,
wouldn't I want to
it's
learn
kind of
that?
like, well, it's kind of like, if I'm a musician, right? So like, if you get a blues guy, right? A blues guy, can kind of, if you listen to like Lead Belly or, you listen to the traditional blues,
Yeah.
a guy like that doesn't have to have all the bells and whistles of like a Eddie Van Halen,
Yeah.
but he can end up like affecting you deeper.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's the simplicity in music that gets to the core. If you get, that's why I think people like punk, because after you listen to too much heavy metal or too much new wave, you listen to when Nirvana came on the scene and brought back punk, then you're like, wow, that's why I like the Clash.
Yeah.
That's why I like the Sex Pistols, because it's that honest
Yeah.
kind of bare bones thing that it can really cut through. And it's the same thing in hip hop when you're on a vinyl based DJ is able to do things. And the simplicity of music has always been the thing. You listen to James Brown funk.
Yeah.
It's somewhat simplistic, but it's also complicated.
Yeah.
But it's in that the spaces in the music and the timing changes and what you can do. That's always been the thing that people sometimes get caught up in the layering and all the capabilities on the DAWs. They
Yeah.
forget that if you think about Prince and like a song like Kiss or a song like When Doves Cry,
Yeah.
the fact that he took the bass line out,
Yeah.
the fact that on Kiss it sounds like a demo. A lot of Prince's songs have this demo aspect that he's like, I'm not going to finish it anymore,
Yeah.
because that will keep it more
Yeah.
honest.
And keep it real with
I think
your
people forget.
listeners.
Yeah, I think they forget that they did too much processing. If you make it sound too perfect, then it doesn't have the character.
Well, yeah, and that's the draw to vinyl, is that this is organic. This is real sound. Like, and it is. It's that, back when analog was around, there's certain warmths that today we're still trying to
Yeah,
mimic,
yeah.
analog
I mean,
sound with digital equipment instead of just using analog equipment. Like, there's like,
yeah.
what, we can still do this. Why are we trying to mimic it when we could just still do it with
Yeah,
analog,
I was talking to a guy, right, and he was telling me that his Moog plugin was the same as my Moog,
Mm,
and then I had him come over, right, and I was like, "Well, here's a real Moog,
yeah.
right? Now you tell me this sounds the same as your
Mm-mm.
plugin, right?" And he was like, "Oh, I guess not."
Yeah, not even close. Well, and that's
Yeah,
that's
because
why I have a lot of respect, though, for like artists like churches, for example. Churches, I mean,
oh yeah,
they're
yeah. You
using
put a
Native
Juno
Instruments
106.
Machina alongside,
Yeah.
real analog synths and stuff. And I feel like it's such a good combination of both. They really take both aspects of digital analog and make it work in such an
Well,
incredible way.
that's the way you should be. Like you take, yeah. I mean, I have a teenage engineering
Yeah,
OP10,
okay, yeah.
right? Full digital thing. But then I got a Moog grandmother. I got a Mother
Mhm.
32. I've got something like a Prophet 5 that I
Yeah.
rebuilt. But and the thing is about those things, like I love churches because they got their prophets, they got their Moogs, they got a Juno 106, which is a
Mhm.
classic,
Yeah.
Roland analog poly thing.
Yeah.
And there's something about those classic Rolands. If
Mhm.
you go back to Duran Duran, they're using the Jupiter 8 and the
Mhm.
106. Those machines, they bring so much character. If you're like, if you're playing chords on something like a Jupiter
Mhm.
or a 106, a Juno, those things they just have this sound that you can't really get. It's the analog nature of those machines is something that people, unless they really physically get one in their and try it, they won't understand it. Half of it is the control schema on these machines, or is like performance capability. Like my Moog, I can change everything. It's all right in front of me. So when I'm playing and I'm taping it, I'm doing things you can't do on a plugin
Mhm.
because I can touch all these
Mhm.
controls musically.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people forget, that's what a lot of the artists in the 80s used to do.
Yeah.
They had these synths and they could change all the control surfaces in real time while they were down. And
Yeah.
you'll never really get to that unless you go into every little note and try to do it. And sometimes you still won't get it the way you do it if you're performing it.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's the piece that people, that's why analog has come back to a certain degree. I mean, Moog has come back in full force. Their
Oh
factories fully operational.
yeah.
Profit
100%.
sequential circuits. is still making their Prophet 6, which is a recreation of the 5.
Mhm.
You can still get these full analog polysynths. They're expensive, but if you're in the business and you've been doing it, it's always worth it. The further you get, if you can find a Moog or find a Prophet or find a Jupiter, it's a good investment in
Yeah,
what you're
very much
doing as
so.
a producer. Yeah, so I'm big into that. I'm glad you have. I like the fact that the way you're writing kind of brings me back to that vinyl time where you're actually doing complete thoughts, not just clips,
Mhm.
not just beats. That you have full song
Yeah.
statements. That's what I like to see artists. All the artists I interview as singer songwriters. That's why I approach singer songwriters probably more than anybody else I talk to. Is because I like to get that novel as feeling when I listen to a singer
Yeah.
songwriter writing a song. You get a complete
Yeah, and
thought.
then it's like you said before, it's all about like, like storytelling. And even if it's not from a storytelling perspective, people have to understand like the state of being that these artists are in or the emotions that they're feeling when they record these songs and release them. I mean, I always see so many people get upset because, certain bands their sound has changed by the next album, and it's like, well, yeah, they've changed as people. They've changed, that their emotions are different at the time. What they're feeling, what they're going through, it's all very different. I mean, you look at a couple different bands. I mean, you look at Anberlin. Look at how much Anberlin's sound changed over time. And then you also look at bands like Bring Me the Horizon. They are so much different from where they were when they first started. And they're still good though. They're still good, and they've
Yeah,
changed as people. They've changed as artists. They've changed with the times. Yeah, but it's not a matter of, oh, they're just trying to make what's popular. No. Like I said, yeah, I DJ, I do a lot of electronic music, but I don't really enjoy making a lot of electronic music a lot of times. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, sometimes I sit down, I'm just having a blast with it. But a lot of
yeah,
times it's just a matter of what I'm feeling at the time. And when I did Outside Memories, it was very indicative of what was going on. I mean, we were all, I mean, for Florida at least, we were all locked down in quarantine. We were supposed to stay
hmm
home. Like, we couldn't go anywhere. Nothing was open. If you went on the interstate to go get, food that was to go, Florida, our interstates are, there's normally a ton of people. Our people tell you about our
Oh
drivers
yeah,
all the time. It was
yeah.
empty. Places that would normally
It's
take
kind
you
of
45 minutes to get there were taking you 20 minutes because there was no traffic. And it was just,
that's like Boston.
yeah,
Boston was the same thing when our lockdown. There was like nothing going on. You're like, wow,
yeah.
like
So that,
you could take 2 hours to get home. And you're like, you can get home.
yeah, you're just there suddenly. Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is, it was very indicative of what was going on and what I was feeling at the time because I mean, there wasn't anybody around. I was stuck at home, and I was happy. At least I got to be home with my family and stuff. So I was
Yeah,
happy,
yeah,
but at the same time, the best interactions that I could have with my friends were gaming online, or we were doing music production while in a Discord call, just trying to talk and produce music together. And we were all working on our own projects, but it was still
yeah,
this.
yeah.
It was the best we could do at the time, and even though we still had interaction with one another, it was a lonely time. There wasn't anything to do. I mean, we were stuck at home. You take a lot for
Yeah,
granted. Hell, even going to work, you take it for granted when you can't even leave the house, really. And
yeah.
I'm big into like virtual reality gaming, for example. I love virtual reality. I think it's an absolute blast. VR chat is just incredible. I have my VR chat fam. Um, but even that, interacting with people on VR chat and going to house parties on, in VR and stuff, it was weird. It was really weird because it got to a point where I went from being a complete social butterfly to just being completely introverted. And it just happened more and more over time. Even with my gaming and stuff, I was talking to people less and less, and it was very interesting to watch myself change over that time. And I've still held on to a lot of it because partly because I liked who I was during quarantine. I liked the fact that I didn't require as much interaction and attention as I used to. So I also started focusing on my own health and myself as a person,
Mhm.
and sitting down and actually making music for a change. Like, my life was so busy before. I was out DJing, 4 or 5 times a week. Sometimes I was going to three, four venues in a night. I mean, I jumped from Ybor to, to like North Tampa down to South Tampa, and like we would just be all over the place sometimes. And
Working musician.
yeah,
Yes, I mean, you get on that treadmill. Yeah, I think what's interesting is like I'm a Buddhist, and part of being Buddhism is the kind of when we do our meditation and our chanting,
mhm,
it kind of like able to slow things down and kind of do this thing where you kind of take that peaceful
mhm,
time. So for me as a producer, a lot of time as a producer musician, like you do spend a lot of quiet
yeah,
time because I mean, most of what I do is production more than
yeah,
performing, and I found that this time was just consistent with the way I was always behaving,
yeah.
but I had less interactions because I did Uber as a side gig,
Okay, yeah.
and that was kind of done.
Yeah, yeah,
In this time, I was like, it's too risky to do it, so I'm like, I'm not doing
yeah,
that. And so that was where I had a lot of social interaction. I get a lot of
mhm,
stories from being an
yeah,
Uber, and having this connection to people and using it to buy my mugs and
yeah,
stuff. And it's just not being able to have that interaction. I kind of dived into my meditation more and more of spending on time on like, oh, I'm going to write that rock opera.
mhm,
I'm actually going to have this idea. I'm going to sketch it out and I'm going to dive. And most of the musicians I've been talking to, I talked to this one lady in London, and she was diving on classical
mhm,
composition and adding orchestration to her work.
yeah.
So she took, instead of having to tour, she spent the last couple lockdown months teaching herself how to actually integrate orchestration into her music,
That's
which she
incredible.
never had.
Yeah,
And then she took that, and I've talked to a bunch of artists. I had a guy who was like, he was a guitar player, learned bass. Had
yeah,
a guitar player went, got a drum set and said, I'm gonna teach myself the drums.
mhm,
I've been wanting to do it, but I'm on tour. I couldn't do it.
yeah,
Now I'm doing it. So people kind of taking it to. A lot of creative people are taking advantage of alone time
yeah,
that creatives going to take this anyway.
yeah,
That's how
yeah.
we
Well,
create.
yeah.
We have to take a
Which is
little time to
less
kind of go off.
interruptions this time.
Yeah, to actually get a complete thought done and actually maybe tighten the music. And I've seen a lot of people creating really good music.
Mhm,
And so I feel good, I think, about the future where people like are starting to realize that sometimes I need to be
mhm,
less connected for a little bit
yeah,
just to be able to finish something.
yeah. No, I agree with that completely. And
Instead of being so distracted.
well, yeah, and we're in such this age of such, instant gratification. Like I said, even with pop music, it has to be under a certain length of song because viewers and listeners, they lose attention. And so you have to keep everything like, constant, 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 constant. And I
Yeah,
think it's
2 minute
been, yeah,
songs.
it's been, well, and it does, it just keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And I think it's been such a wake-up call, like we were saying, for a lot of people to sit down and take time and really take a step back from that instant gratification in everyday life. I mean, I used to work at Bath and Body Works for a while, and we had these people that would come in and they got their soaps, and if they didn't get their soaps, I mean, they had a meltdown sometimes. I've witnessed people get into fist fights over soap. Long story, a lot of stories of that instant
Yeah, yeah.
gratification and stuff. And then you
Oh
go
yeah,
to
it's a
the
big
fact
problem.
that all the Bath and Body Works were closed.
Now
So
they're totally done. They got to go to Amazon.
I gotta go to Amazon. So yeah, but it was just one of those things where it's like, things that people were taking for granted of I can just go get it whenever I want. I can get it right now. I can get it right there on the spot to you gotta wait.
Yeah,
You can't. You gotta either order it online, and good luck ordering a lot of things online right now because even then it was taken forever.
it would take forever.
So I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. But now
two
everything's there.
2 day Prime shipping turned into, yeah, we'll have it to you in about 2 weeks, and that's Prime.
2 weeks.
Like,
Yeah.
so it's changed a lot of people, and I hope a lot of people have
Well, I'm
taken the
hoping
time
that
to
we.
improve as
Yeah.
people during this time.
Well, I'm hoping it feel like as being a kind of musicologist, this age has felt kind of like the '50s bubblegum period,
Hmm.
where there was a lot. Bands didn't have albums; they had singles,
Yeah,
and the singles were like 2.3 minutes,
yeah,
4 minutes 40 seconds. We seem to be we slid back into that
yeah,
where what happened was, the Beatles and George Martin happened, and they expanded the pop dictionary.
Yeah.
That you could have full albums like Sgt. Pepper's and the White Album, and you could have these full concepts. And in the 70s is full of that, and it continues through the 80s. But after Napster kind of killed that, iTunes and all these streaming services kind of changed that to go backwards, where we're back to like pre-Beatle time.
Yeah.
And I think during this lockdown, I have seen more people, expanding their song length. And I interview lots of bands, and I'm seeing their songs creeping into 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7-minute songs.
Yeah.
And that's very positive to me, because like I said, I'm in the age where I would sit, in the basement listening to The Wall.
Yeah.
Yeah. and listening to Quadrophenia, and these, they're gonna go, or Yes, those songs go 8-9 minutes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're like the whole side of an album, and it seems like I'm hoping the music fans will get back into more substantial, thought-provoking, things that make them kind of, oh wow, this artist is actually trying to say something.
Yeah.
And maybe I
agree with
back
that.
And listen. I'm hoping, because of what's going on, there's a deep nature to what's going on. And so people might want something more substantial to feed their head.
Yeah, and I think after this, and I think we've seen a lot of it already as I talk about it, what I think we're going to see a lot of is, we saw a lot of like the metal and the metal scene and the emo kids and stuff. They all really kind of died down for a while. But, here's hoping that all the teenagers that have been, locked inside with their parents for, a couple months now kind of brings that back. Yeah, the teen angst and stuff comes back into play.
The grunge, second wave of grunge,
Yeah, exactly. Like bring certain subcultures back. I had taken a class in college. It was one of my IDS classes. I took it with my sociology professor, but it was how culture has, influenced and affected music. And it was very interesting to go through and see all of this. And I think we're going to see a lot of subcultures come back around and kind of come back out, because right now, you're pretty much your everyday average Joe, or you're a raver, or you're into rap music. And even the rock kids and the metal kids, they're not really heavily around, and they don't really express it in their clothing and what they do in everyday life as much anymore. So you're pretty much one of,
like the mod.
Yeah, you're like one of three things right now. So like I think we're going to see a lot of things evolve very quickly. Like we were saying, we're already seeing music change and turn back to certain roots of longer songs and stuff. So I think fashion's going to revolutionize very quickly. I think, culture as a whole is going to change. We're going to see a lot of subcultures come back into play, and I think we're already starting to see it.
Like you go into the 60s, you get the like political music,
exactly.
Protest music. You get like Dylan, saying the times are changing, and, writing those songs inspired a whole generation to say, hey, I can actually use music to have some kind of statement.
Yeah.
Besides just, be getting jiggy with it.
Well, and yeah, I think we're going to see kind of, like you were saying, we're already kind of in that 50s, and I think we're going to go through 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and all of that again. Because, and I think or all at once, or very rapidly, because we're already in a time where there is a lot of political unrest. It doesn't matter what side of things you're on. If you're I'm an independent personally. It doesn't matter what side of things you're on. Everything politically is in a complete uproar right now, and I think we're going to see more of that into music. You get into that rebelliousness, that's going to add in. Yeah, go ahead.
There's the whole social disruption of the whole world because of COVID is going to cause, artists to react to it in different ways, because there's a total upheaval. And so, the environmental movement's going to be like reminding people that, things like this kind of come from environmental destruction. There's going to be social movements that say, certain people are affected more than other people. So there's going to be all kinds of statements coming out from artists, and in that, when those statements come out, they're not going to fit the pop formula. They're not going to fit like a beat formula or a clip formula. They're going to be what the artist felt,
Mhm.
and so that's what I've been running into with a lot of the artists I'm talking to. And it's interesting that the music tools that are out here today,
Mhm.
there's more and more tools like beatbox, groove boxes,
Mhm.
which were a big thing in the 90s, have come back,
Yeah.
which allow people to have full production capabilities without a computer.
Oh yeah.
And then the analog synths from like Moog and Prophet and
Mhm.
sequential circuits, you can get a synth that could recreate what Pink Floyd did.
Yeah.
They can recreate what Pete Townsend did on Who Are You.
Yeah.
So you can get those sounds again. And I think that's already starting. I've been talking to bands in Berlin and in the Netherlands and in Australia, and there's a lot of like modular synthesis, or guys who are doing very experimental stuff, kind of like what Kraftwerk
Mhm.
and Brian Eno
Yeah.
and Bowie. There's a lot of people doing that work, and it's in the underground. It's bubbling up, and it's starting to come back. And
Yeah, and
you're going to see some pretty cool stuff.
I think we're going to see a lot of those elements start to pour into modern music a lot more. So, old school elements that were extremely expressive and creative. I mean, back to like a cultural standpoint, we've already seen, I mean, take rap, like in the rap scene right now. We have seen a lot of the rap music start to hybridize with a lot of like the emo and metal and stuff. You've got rappers right now who are full on doing metal screams but rapping
Oh yeah,
throughout tracks.
you
You've
got to
got
be like
yeah, and
full bands, like with a rap artist with a full band.
yeah, and
You
you're
know,
getting a lot of this hybridization of this cross between emo and rap. I mean, you look at artists like Little Peep, you look at artists like XXXTentacion, um, or even Juice World. You look at Lil Uzi Vert. You look at their styles, even what they wear, and how they
yeah, like
changed a lot.
The Hot Future group. If you look at like what Earl Sweatshirt,
Hmm.
Tyler, and Frank Ocean,
Yeah.
these guys are a mixture of jazz, soul,
Hmm.
psychedelia, punk.
Yeah.
These collectives have like the Hot Future collective had punk, it had soul, it had hip hop, it had
Yeah.
rock, it's got experimental progressive music going on.
Hmm.
So those things are, to me, it's really interesting in the hip hop era, or the area of music.
Hmm.
There are complete albums that people are willing to buy
Yeah.
and listen to as full projects.
Hmm.
From Frank Ocean's Blonde to like Tyler the Creator's last like song, I think it was Igor.
Yeah.
Igor was a concept record.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that if you fans of like guys like Earl Sweatshirt, they'll say they listen to the whole record.
Yeah.
You know, guys who are so in that genre, it's more common for people to actually listen to the complete thought.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
And
it
so
definitely.
that's
Even
very
with like
encouraging.
Kendrick Lamar stuff, Kendrick
Yeah,
Lamar is
yeah,
very similar as well in the way that his albums are meant to be listened all the way through. It's supposed to read like a message, It's like a
yeah. It's a
story, like back
concept.
to
It's
what
a
we were
concept
saying,
album.
back to, yeah,
Yeah,
that
it's like
novel.
Yeah, it's like listening to Tommy or Quadrophenia, or listening to the Wish You Were Here,
Mhm.
from Floyd. I mean, that's a complete thought.
Yeah.
And that to me, it's kind of, the baton was passed from like bands like Pink Floyd to the hip hop community, which has embraced the concept album.
Well, and I
it's really interesting.
and I think it's a part of this coming full circle thing because I mean we talk about a lot of rock artists that used to do this and it's going back to now the hip hop artists and stuff and I think it's very indicative of history repeating itself. I mean you figure rock and roll at its core came from the African American community. So
Yeah, from Lead Belly,
yeah,
Robert Johnson.
and
Yeah,
it was I hate to use the word stolen from, but it was stolen from
yeah.
them. I mean, you look in the
I'm
40s and the
aware.
50s when it was really evolving, you had these amazing black artists who would put out these incredible tracks, and then record labels would come in, re-record the track with a white artist, and then release it and say, "This is white music." And I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that is
I
just
mean,
like a absolutely incredible thing to see how real music and how really listening and how music's supposed to be listened to has already come back full circle and gone back to its real original roots at this point.
I mean, as an African American artist, I've always kind of known the history, from like a lot of the American art
Ooh, I think I lost
forms.
connection.
You're still there? You there? Hello? I hear you. Hello?
I
Did it
can
drop off?
briefly hear you, but I think I lost connection here.
I still hear
See if I
you.
can hop over to a different one.
Hello?
I,
You there?
yeah, I'm here. You got me?
Okay. Yeah, I got you. Yeah, but it's interesting that Keith Richards is a big proponent of supporting some of the classic, blues guys. And it's always Jack White. He's a big archivist and trying to support that genre, because a lot of people were kind of upset at Led Zeppelin in that they used to cover a lot of Robert Johnson, a lot of Lead Belly, and not cite it.
Yeah.
Where like Keith Richards and Jagger were always into citing where they got their influences from, and they would go back and they would, give money back into that community.
Yeah.
And Robert Plant and the boys and Zepp seem to not understand that.
Yeah.
I appreciate, Led Zeppelin, and they're a great band. But the Stones were always kind of, as an African American musician, I was like, well, the Stones are kind of doing it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I appreciate music and I understand where they're coming at, and they've got great songs. But I do kind of I really appreciate Keith Richards' affinity and understanding of that art form.
Yeah, and where things really originate with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, a big thing, because I'm a big jazz guy, right? A lot of what I do comes from Miles Davis, comes from Herbie Hancock.
Yeah.
Coltrane. There's so much stuff there that some music fans, I always tell somebody, would say, what should I listen to? I said, well, you ought to listen to some kind of blue. You ought to listen to some Sun Ra, or I always give people because in that form, that American form from those artists, there's so much content, there's so much musicality in jazz that you can use it in every genre.
Exactly. Well,
and it
has. Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, you look at heavy metal as we know it, it comes from jazz music. Like the scales and such that are used all evolved from jazz music. So like you were saying, I really think more people need to go back, and I know a lot of people aren't a fan of jazz, but I think they need to give it a chance and realize, hey, this is where a lot of what you listen to comes from.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you listen to Hendrix and you listen to Mitch Mitchell playing the drums with Jimi Hendrix, Mitch Mitchell's style of drumming is totally jazz based.
Yeah.
And the reason Hendrix was so innovative is he embraced that jazz, capability that Mitch had.
Yeah.
With his cosmic blues, and then he had this jazz capability, and he had a drummer that had the capability to go there.
Yeah.
And that's why the experience doesn't sound like any traditional rock band, because they actually have so many fusion elements in what they're doing that not a lot of people get that. It was always just rock and psychedelic. It's really a jazz fusion.
Oh, I agree with that completely. Yeah.
But yeah, it's just interesting to talk to artists. I love talking to artists like yourself that are kind of have the history. I think all musicians are, to a certain extent, have a musicology kind of thing going on, because they're reference points. So I didn't really get into your reference points, because I always like to ask that.
Yeah.
Who are the artists that you really are inspired by, in you would name check as being people that you wanted to maybe continue that work, and maybe your take on it.
Okay, so for me, like I was saying, when I was little, a big part of what influenced me was Tom Petty, Goo Goo Dolls, Journey. And now when I'm DJing more than anything, and it's very separate from what I would label for, when I actually produce, but for DJing, I would say artists like, Joyryde, Jauz, Tisoki, and DogBlood, they all have this very fusion-esque thing of multiple genres going on. When I go to see, if I see Joyryde or Jauz, doing a live set, when they're DJing, it's a combination of multiple types of music. They'll play different types of house music, but they'll also play trap. They'll play some dubstep stuff. They will play songs that are a hybridization of multiple genres, and it's such a this high energy and fun set.
Yeah.
Like you have to dance. It's so much energy and such a good vibe, and you get so many different genres at once. And so when I would say when I DJ, that would be a big draw and a big influence for me would be those artists like Jauz and Joyryde, Tisoki, DogBlood. I labeled DogBlood in there even though they're not as close to the other three, but I label them
Mhm.
because they really do real house music in some of their sets. And when I listen to it, and yeah, I mean there's a draw for me, and that's why I said I do two different types of sets. I do those high energy trap, dubstep,
Mhm.
high energy house stuff, and then I do real house music sets because I
Yeah.
love doing
Yeah.
both, and it's a very different performance both times. I mean, when I'm doing trap and dubstep, people really go hard, they'll headbang, they really get into it. But the same can be
Yeah, it's
said,
got kind of a punk aesthetic. It has a little bit of a punk aesthetic
yeah,
to
and
it.
but the same can be said for real house music. People really get into it. People they get up and they actually dance. I think that's one of my big draws to real house music is
Yeah,
it doesn't have a whole lot going on. It's not overly complex, but people love it.
yeah, kind of like funk.
Yeah,
You
people.
know, you like. I'm a Parliament Funkadelic. I'm a big James Brown
I
Sly,
got you. Well, and
and funk. Yeah, yeah, funk was that kind of it really gets people going.
yeah,
Like in the '70s, that way. I think in the '70s, what you do today with the house and the dubstep and what you're doing as a DJ kind of equates to what funk was in the '70s.
yeah,
That was the kind of house music in the
hmm,
early '70s. That's when people really got into the groove
yeah.
with funk. I feel it has some elements to where it seems to come from that.
Oh, very much so, because I mean, you look at house music today and it still has heavy funk elements into it. I mean, it's still heavily influenced by funk music. You have older funk tracks that have been sampled and still are used in today's house music. And I look at that more of a, honoring the tracks that came before it. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's all about that groove. You just kind of you vibe with it, you just groove with it, and you just really enjoy the music. It has that very old school effect on people. And like I said, I've sat there and played, just I'm not talking future house or bass house or whatever,
hmm
real house music. And
oh
when
yeah,
you
I
sit
know what you're
down and
saying.
do that real house music set and you see people having a blast to it, you know that it's alive and well, and that it's that old school effect, and that these tracks, these funk tracks, like we were talking about, they did incredible things for music. And to this day, they still
Yeah,
are.
yeah. Parliament Funkadelic and James Brown are the basis of all hip hop. You
Mhm.
know, they're heavily sampled, like Bootsy Collins bass lines and Bernie Worrell's keyboard work is
Yeah.
the basis of almost all hip hop. And and it segs into the genres you're talking about. Their work, coming out with James Brown and Sly and all the other funksters at that time, it is just something that's I don't know. It's just there's this innate capability. Then it all came from jazz.
Yeah.
I mean, funk is just taking jazz and tightening it up to make
Yeah.
it have a groove. Where
Yeah.
jazz sometimes will go and not have the groove and go and be
Hmm.
very experimental and maybe come back to a groove. And what
Hmm.
Parliament Funkadelic and Bootsy and those guys did is said, well, we're gonna stay in the groove, and
Yeah.
they actually say that, and that's what it kind of came from. It came from the guys had jazz capabilities saying, "Well, I'm going to stay in these grooves so the dance folks can get to it."
Can get to
And
it. Yeah.
yeah, and the hipsters and the jazz clubs, they don't really like that. They wanted to go off in a different way, and
Yeah.
the same players are playing the same things, but they went to different zones and say, "Well, I want to
Yeah.
get into that zone with these hippies that want to get funky and want to dance," and then boom, and that's what you get.
Yeah. Well, and it's incredible to see because, I mean, if you think about that and you look at it from a DJing standpoint, it's really where DJing ultimately started is with being able to keep people dancing. But at the same time, it's completely experimental. It's completely doing it on the fly. And it's, those
Yeah,
jazz roots of let's just keep this going. Let's just freestyle it. And that's
yeah,
why a
yeah.
lot of times when I DJ, I don't practice or pre-plan any of my sets anymore. I get up there and I groove with it and I vibe with it, and I groove with the people. It's all about watching the crowd and seeing what they're feeling. And
Well, that's the
to
way your real musician does. You know, I think, and like, and you have your song, you have your main, you know, you have what you're gonna do, right?
yeah,
You're a musician. You practice. You have it. But it's like what every great musician does is when they get in front of a crowd. The reason I used to love to go to concerts back in the '70s and stuff, you know, I see the Almonds or I go see Funkadelic, is because I knew every time I went to go, they were gonna do it different,
yeah,
and they were kind of going to vibe off the crowd, and they were going to give me a different version of Maggot Brain from the night before. You know,
yeah.
they were going to do it. You know, tear the roof off isn't going to sound the same.
It's
And
always a different vibe.
yeah, you see the Dead because they're going to play it different. They're going to, you
Mm,
know, you see Dylan because Dylan would actually pull out totally different lyrics to Idiot Wind. You know,
yeah,
he would have whole versions depending on how he felt. He would have a different story with different lines. And you're
yeah.
like, wow, that's what I want to see. You know, that's what I want to hear.
Hmm.
And some people today have kind of, you know, have lost that, you know, with some of the pop bands.
Oh
There's
yeah,
so much, they're totally they're on their sequencers, they're on their main stage, they're controlling it to such a degree, and they have no creativity when it's like, why don't you change the lyrics? Why don't you go and do the part that you didn't put out? You know, like
yeah,
that's what the old bands used to do. They would go out on, you know, Tom Petty would do a different line they didn't get to do. You know,
yeah,
when he performed it, he would change the song and maybe play the verse that didn't get on the record.
yeah, and do
And
something
that's
that
what
people
people want.
haven't
Yeah,
seen
wanted to see.
before. Well, and
Yeah, that's
don't
what
get me
people
wrong,
want.
I have a great respect for like modern pop stars and the hard work and the between the lights and the choreography and
Oh yeah,
all of
it's a
it
big
is
performance.
absolutely incredible. But yeah, but at the same time, it's all part of that instant gratification, like we said previously, and it's all about everybody getting the same experience and getting to do the
It's
same
more like
thing. But
theater. It's almost like you're doing a Broadway show,
yeah,
and and
that's what kind
that
of
is the
separated music from theater, though, was it was more unique in the sense that every time, like you said, it was a unique experience.
yeah. I get that people like that theater and they like that replication, and that's cool. Yeah, but I think like if when you're a musician, it's more fun. Like you said, you don't have to practice, or if you do practice, you kind of like, oh, I'm going to give the crowd a different variation.
Yeah.
and still give them the beat or give them whatever, but you're going to give it to them in a different way that makes you feel good. You know, there was this funny story about the Eagles. You know, in the Eagles during like the Hotel California era, um, the Glenn Fry and you know, he had this thing where he's really tight, right? So he decided the whole Hotel California concert they were going to do it note for note exactly like the album. And if
Okay.
anybody in the band didn't do it, they got fined. He would fine Joe Walsh. He'd find, and they all would get fined if they didn't play it exactly as the record. And it
Yeah.
was so mind numbing that the band was like becoming like very disinterested in even doing it because it
Yeah.
wasn't, you know, you should never do that to a band. It's like you're gonna
Mm-mm.
you constrain them so much. And it
Yeah.
kind of reminds me of what, you know, that was in the '70s and they were playing live instruments, but they were making themselves almost constrained like they were running a sequencer.
Yeah, like kind of like a robot at that point.
Yeah, and that's not really where you want to be.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to give people something new. You have to, I mean, like you got to set yourself apart in some way or another anymore because like for example, with rappers and DJs and stuff, there are countless other rappers and DJs. You have to be doing something different. You have to be setting yourself apart in some way or another because if you're not, you just get lost in that local level crowd of, well,
Yeah,
he's just another local DJ. And if you're not bringing a spin on something or your own unique take on something or even just a unique experience all around, then you're not going to set yourself apart enough to actually go somewhere with this. And it's interesting because in the EDM community, we're seeing certain artists who have kind of broken off. And I was having this discussion with one of my friends. We look at artists like Porter Robinson and Madeon who have started off very EDM-esque
hmm
and had major tracks that heavily influenced the EDM community. and are now kind of doing their own hybridization thing. They're considered part of the EDM community, but at the same time, they get up there with real instruments. They get up there with
Yeah.
some new form of performance. I mean, Madeon gets up there, and even though it's all through MIDI controllers and stuff,
Hmm.
there's a bunch of them. He's got like 8 of them up there with him, and he's just completely freestyling it and doing things on the fly. I mean, you looked at artists like the Crystal Method. I know it's just one of them now, but back when there was 2 of them, it was all done on the spot. It was all
Yeah.
that unique experience on the fly. And now you
Yeah.
look at artists like Porter Robinson, who he has gone and done his own thing completely. It still has those electronic elements to it, but it is its own thing.
What
San
it did was
Holo as
interesting.
well.
Yeah. What's cool about that is it's actually going back to the original electronic music back in the late 50s.
Yeah,
When
exactly.
when the when the modular modes came up with these gigantic, look like mainframe computers, and you had like, Keith Emerson and the guys from Yes, Rick Wakeman, Bernie Worrell, they had these big modular synths, and you kind of did create stuff on the fly.
Hmm.
I would say my modular analog gear that I have in my bedroom studio, it causes you to create like what DJs create with all these, MIDI controllers and Pro Tools. You on an analog synth, you can use a low frequency oscillator to create a loop that's an analog loop. You
Yeah.
can create analog clips, and you can have these clips kind of counter rotating and building up on each other with all your different analog
Hmm.
synths. And it's very rhythmic, and it can do the same thing.
Yeah,
And a lot
exactly.
of these guys are figuring out that they can, get MIDI controllers and then run analog Euro racks and
Yeah.
create all their grooves off of analog equipment. And
Yeah.
in Europe, in Berlin, this is what's going on.
Yeah.
This in London, this is what's going on. I've been talking to I was talking a couple of days ago to a classical musician that
Mhm.
plays a harp and
Oh, that's incredible.
integrates it with like analog and digital equipment,
That's
and does like
incredible.
full instrumental sets with her harp and all this electronic equipment. And it's really cool. I mean, I'm seeing more and more people doing that. They're
Yeah.
bringing drummers on stage, they're bringing guitar players on stage, horn sections, and they're doing a hybrid between the DAW and the modular and the analog and the samples. And that's really EDM. Is that's where it's going to go.
Oh yeah, I
It
agree
might
with
not
that
be it might
completely.
not be EDM anymore, but it's going to be something else. It's going to
It's
actually go back to electronic music.
well, I was about to say, I think we're going to see the term dance music, just dance music again, not
Yeah,
electronic dance music, but just dance music
dance.
in general
Yeah, it's
again.
whatever.
And
Yeah,
I mean, we already look overseas a lot at like, some of the European countries over in the UK and stuff. Things like house and techno, they never died over there. House and techno
oh yeah,
are
great.
they're
Still,
they're
still
strong. They're going extremely strong. It's interesting because people don't realize that American EDM, we still draw all of our influences from over in Europe. It still
oh yeah.
affects our scene. What's big over there comes over here. And for a while, when I really first started doing my gigs and like going to actual clubs and stuff, the first couple months, like I said, it was mostly dubstep and trap for me. And then I was looking, and I'm like, house and techno are really starting to grow over here. And next thing you know, I started doing, I did electro house. So it
Oh
was
yeah.
still some high energy house music, but everybody I was DJing with was trap and dubstep. And it was very interesting because, I was the only guy doing house in a sea of trap and dubstep. And since doing that, house music, I don't want to say it's grown because of me, because I've discovered a lot of other people though that felt the same way.
Yeah.
And I've tried to grow a community of, house music in the area, and it was already there. There was already people doing it. I just had to find them. And
That's
now
what
that
I
I
find
see
that's
it, it's just there's
interesting.
so many house music and techno lovers, and it's interesting because even though I focused mainly on house music and trying to find other artists doing house,
Mhm.
you start to find some of the techno artists along the way. One of my favorites, his two DJs that I absolutely love that they do techno sets. One of them is mostly house. My buddy DJ Panda, he does a lot of house sets with me. We just vibe so well together. But even when he does techno sets, he does an incredible job. Him and Where's Rin is another one. He plays a lot of VR with me, but I actually know him in person.
Wow.
Both of them will do techno sets sometimes because I host house nights at one of the venues that I play at. And I allow techno DJs to play as well because, house, it's hard enough to find house DJs. And I couldn't imagine, techno DJs are having an easy time trying to find places, at least in my area.
Yeah,
It's
it
probably
tends
pretty
to.
hard for them to find
It's
places.
what's cool, I guess, like in the Euro scene, or even in like if you go to like Seoul or Tokyo, because I spent 2 years in Tokyo back in 2004 2006, and the scene in Tokyo was just amazing because you could find everything. There was like everything. You had
Yeah.
guys doing like neo soul. You had guys doing punk rock.
Hmm.
You had guys doing like Joy Division. you know,
Yeah.
and they were doing everything, and and it just what I like about the kind of European or the international scene. There seems to be more willingness to do cross genre,
Hmm.
and also more willingness for an audience. Like in a show, you could go to a show and you could have an EDM DJ and then a punk rock band and then a soul singer and then a hip
Yeah.
hop in the same club for the
Yeah.
same set, and it doesn't have to all be one.
Yeah.
And that kind of ability for the audience to not be so strict in their taste was always something I appreciated when I was overseas. I was like, wow, that's a scene I got a
Yeah.
booking agent that's actually going to get me over there, and then now we all got locked down.
That's awesome.
but like
Well, not
right
not
when I get
awesome
my
on the
booking agent,
lockdown part, but awesome on the
yeah, my
fact that you were going to get to do that.
yeah, because I mean the scene I'm in is like the synth wave,
Yeah.
modular scene, and it's real heavy. There's a lot of guys. They just go on stage with a Euro rack, and all they do is experiment all night,
Yeah.
and the crowd is into it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like where you want to be. Like the fact that you can be that free and that creative is always inspiring to me.
Yeah.
When we get like a scene that supports that,
Hmm.
that's really cool for the musicians involved.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that completely because I mean, and we need to see, I think, more of it here in the United States as well. Because, like I said, we draw a lot of our influences from over in Europe and in the UK and stuff, and what they're doing. I mean, even our fashion right now. I mean, you look at fashion, and Japan
Yeah,
is the center of the world for Japan for fashion right now.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that being
Yeah,
said, it's
yeah.
like,
Korea, South Korea.
we're kind of like the melding pot of everything. Like everything just comes in and kind of melts into the United States because we are such a multicultural country. We have people from all places here. It's an incredible thing, and I really hope to see, more peace amongst all of the cultures that are here in the United States because I know there's a lot of unrest, but what we have going on from a cultural and artistic standpoint in the United States is an absolutely beautiful and incredible thing, and it's the only place in the world that's really doing that.
Yeah, I just wish we could get like a better scene sometimes for in order for us to get these things combined. But it's cool all these things can happen, but a lot of times bands have to go outside the US and then come back in.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
in order to get the trend, they get big in
mhm.
Europe and then they come back and then suddenly the
Yeah,
US
suddenly
doesn't
everybody
accept
loves
them.
them, right?
Yeah, it's like how come we can't just do that from here? Hendrix had to go, like overseas to
Mhm.
get it to be big. A lot of big bands, Funkadelic and stuff, did a lot of touring overseas to get a big audience that was very supportive, and then allowed them to do better in the U.S.
Yeah,
because they could do so good in that environment. And that's you just want to be able to as a musician to be able to do what you want to do creatively and get supported. And it tends that the international audience sometimes is more supportive of acts that are doing something maybe a little off the cuff.
yeah,
Uh,
agreed.
but we're kind of getting near the end of what we can do. We can only go to like 75 minutes,
Oh,
and I
okay.
really appreciate you being on the show. And this is going to get pushed out to 11 podcast platforms,
That's
including
awesome.
Spotify and Apple Podcast. So within an hour, I'll send you the links and I'll put this up on my social media. The cool thing about Anchor is it has an integration with Instagram and Spotify, and the Spotify version of this podcast will be link to a story and a highlight on my Instagram channel, where you can do the same thing.
Oh yeah, I will definitely be sharing this. This has been such a cool experience, and it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. Like it's very rare that I get to go and, sit and talk in depth about, music historically, culturally, how it's evolved and changed, and even on an international level, like we were just talking about. So it's just not something I get to do very often. So I greatly appreciate you having me. This has been awesome.
Yeah, I created this format because I felt like the 10-minute interview where somebody has to pay somebody
Yeah.
to just pitch one song was not what I like. I like, storytellers. I like behind the music. I like classic albums. I like reading, or documentaries or biographies of musicians. And I say, you know what? I'm just going to go out there and do it.
Yeah.
Because I'm a musician. I think musicians need this. And so
Right.
it's just getting bigger and bigger. And we're happy that we get more people that are into it. Any bands that you talk to or other artists that you talk to, let them know we're doing this. And we usually get our guests from feedback and,
Mhm.
working in a kind of community type of spirit. So yeah,
I'll
hopefully you enjoyed
definitely
it.
I'll definitely send a couple artists your way that I think would be absolutely awesome and probably love to talk to you about this stuff more.
Okay, great. Fuzzed-Up Music. Everybody check it out. Go out to all their social media. We're going to have their links on the podcast. So click them and support your favorite musician and support Fuzzed-Up Music. And we'll talk to you later. We always tend to have people come back on the show. So
I
if you've
would
got some
love to.
new project coming into future, let us know and we'll talk to you again.
All right, I got you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Bye.